All right, got a few things to set up still. One of them is the title of this week's story. There we go. And hopefully that plane will pass. Now let's see if we're live and if this is recording correctly. That's the part I'm curious about. You break my heart into so many pieces. You break my heart like nobody does. Yeah, there we are. You break my heart in all the right places. And then again, you break it some more. You break my heart as... That's not how it goes. You break my heart as if you meant it. And I know there's no way you'd know that you'd break my heart, then take my heart, then break my heart some more. Hey, Crimson. All right, question for the audience. Am I audible and is my voice synchronized to the video? So 1, 2, 3, 4. Because I've had some problems with that in the past. Awesome. Let's see if I've got a better place for this that doesn't look like a giant dildo coming out of the sky. That is kind of what it is. Okay, then the next part that we have to sound check. Yeah. YouTube, and I want to check that you can hear what comes out of YouTube as well. Just in case I need to do some looking upping here. My word, it's slow today. Oh dear, I hope that's not going to give us any trouble. It is very slow. What is happening here? Okay, I can probably kill some more. Don't need Slack. Don't need the work chat. I do need Audition. I do need this. Well, let's see if it's structural. I don't know if it's YouTube itself. Yeah, I see that I'm probably, yeah. Okay, well, I'm going to find out what's happening here. This is one of those things that we need to check out before we go further. I seem like I've completely frozen. Yeah, I see what's happening. Wow. Okay. So this is on multi. That's where it should be. I have not seen this before. So what's eating up my processor? Well, Streamlabs, no surprise. I guess it's just that. Okay, I seem to be smoother now again. Now, let's see if you can hear this. See if I can hear it. The stream is dropping entirely. Well, that's worrisome. Okay, so 16% over. Okay. Well, we are just going to have to restart Google Chrome, because I think that's the culprit. Yeah, there we go.
A full quality or whatever.
Not to worry. All just normal teething problems. It should be a lot smoother now. Not to worry. Just normal teething problems. Yeah, there we go. That looks better. No, I will not restore Tokyo tension. Words. And let's see if this stays stable now. There's always something in it. Pin this part to the right and the story to the left. And hope that this time it works. Even this already feels choppy again. Taking another look here. Yeah, there's just the Windows server. Memory's not even crazy by the looks of things. Well, eventually we just have to accept what's happening and move on with our lives. Because I want to record this story. All right, what do we have? A slice of life travelogue story about a young wolf who is sent to Tokyo for work and discovers he had a lot to learn about working in other cultures. Very nice. In the end, he gets some pointers from a colleague and starts putting it into practice and believing he can handle it. Well, that's helpful. Okay. Clear a little space. And I'm going to be using my fun little jog interface for the audio, so you're going to hear me zipping back and forth through my recording. Let's get into it. We've got Rick Stoller. He's a grey wolf, competent at the technical things, but out of his comfort zone in sales. Spent a long time gentrified in North Carolina. North Carolina, how do we sound over there? I took the liberty of already checking out Donna and a light Irish accent. We'll have to see how light that gets to be. Oh, it is YouTube. Look at that. It's freezing again. So, North Carolina accent. Yeah, helpfully there was something called an accent tag a while back.
My name is Derek Gooch. I'm from Central North Carolina, from the Raleigh-Durham area.
Raleigh-Durham area.
My wife is insisting that I do this.
My wife is insisting that I do this.
And I guess keep a record of how people talk from where I am.
From where I am.
So I'm going to read some words.
I'm going to read some words.
Aunt, which we say, if I was talking about my actual aunt, I'd say aunt. My Aunt Sherry.
My Aunt Sherry.
Roof, route, wash, oil, which is spelled O-I-L in case you were curious. Theater, iron.
Salmon.
Caramel. Fire, water, sure.
Tire, water, sure. Okay, let's see if we've got that. Rick Stoller, grey wolf, competent in all the technical things, but out of his comfort zone in sales. Spent a long time gentrified in North Carolina, so maybe a light Raleigh-Durham accent. Raleigh-Durham accent. Sant? Is that it? What's he doing?
Data, ruin, crayon, New Orleans, pecan, both,
pecan,
again,
yeah, accent.
Probably. Spitting image, Alabama, lawyer, coupon, mayonnaise.
Okay. Rick Stoller, grey wolf, competent in all the technical things but out of his comfort zone in sales. Spent a long time gentrified in North Carolina, so maybe like Raleigh-Durham accent. And Fiona O'Clair, she's a red fox. Red fox. Irish. You're right there, father. Fiona O'Clair, red fox, competent, whip-smart, takes no shit. Kind of like Donna from Suits, but maybe more serious and a little kinder. Light Irish accent. Crimson Ruari, Ikeda Sota. Yeah, double length. Gozaimasu. And they have the soft. Okay. Let's give this a shot. You're listening to The Voice of Dog. I'm Kaki, your faithful fireside companion. And today's story is Tokyo Tension by Crimson Ruari, who has short stories in Heat 14 and Claw 1, and you can find more of his stories on his webpage. Please enjoy Tokyo Tension. Nope, fucked it up already. Please enjoy Tokyo Tension by Crimson Ruari. And I'm getting into the habit of fixing the start right away, saving myself just a little bit of editing time. Just discovered a band called the Milk Carton Kids, and I'm really enjoying them. Sort of shades of, I guess Simon and Garfunkel. Oh, Japanese. Gonna have to figure that out. Ohayo gozaimasu. Ohayo. Ohayo gozaimasu. Teach me. Oh. It's probably a brand.
Hi, it's Yuka. Today I'm going to share the lesson about basic Japanese greetings. Well, I hope those of you who've already learned Japanese or been learning Japanese find new phrases or new words in this video. So let's get started. Okay, so let's take a look of basic Japanese greetings. Good morning. Ohayo gozaimasu. Ohayo gozaimasu.
Ohayo.
Morning. Ohayo gozaimasu. Ohayo gozaimasu.
Ohayo. Oh, that's a long one already. Gozaimasu. Ohayo gozaimasu. And we'll say that with a smile. All right. Ruari. Ohayo gozaimasu. The two raccoons behind the front desk bowed in unison. Rick ducked his head as he stepped up to the desk and set his bag down. It was chest height for the clerks, but as a 6-foot-tall wolf, he felt like he was looming. Thank you. The head clerk smiled at him, and Rick realized that they weren't raccoons, but raccoon dogs. Tanuki, he recalled. Leaner, larger, a little pointier, and still a lot shorter than he was. The clerk's English was heavily accented, but clear. Good evening, sir. How may we help you? Rick passed over his passport. He tried a little smile. I have a room. Rick Stoller. The clerk glanced up at him, then at his passport, and started typing on the computer. Rick felt his smile might have been a little too big. He felt like everything about him was. Nope. That's the Tanuki speaking. Felt like everything about him was. Hi. Yes, sir. I see your room is on a company account. Do you have a card for incidentals? Rick nodded. Yes. Nope. For incidentals? Rick nodded. Yeah. Yes. Hi. He huffed, then clapped his muzzle shut and patted down his pants until he found his wallet. After 12 hours on a plane, getting through customs, getting a train card, and then taking multiple trains to get to his hotel, even simple tasks had become monumental efforts. Finally, he found it in his front pocket, a concession to economy airline seating. He started to slide his card across the table, but the clerk touched the tray on the counter discreetly, and he nodded, then put his card there. Typo fixes. Okay. I actually made a copy of this document, so I'll go back to your original. and paste in your changes. Tokyo. Tension. What would it have been? There we go. You break my heart as if you meant to. But I know there's no way you'd know that you'd break my heart, then take my heart, then break my heart for good. Dun, 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 dun. Okay. Thank you for that, Crimson. And pop this back on the right. All right, now don't touch it because I'm recording it now. All right, where are we now? Tray on the counter discreetly, and he nodded, then put his card there. Then put his card there. The clerk smiled and gave a little bow as he picked up the tray in both paws. More typing, and then the card was returned in the same fashion, joined by a room key. The clerk looked up at him again. Your room will be 2306. Is there anything else we can do for you, sir? Rick picked up his cards and shook his head. No thanks. The clerk bowed again. Arigatou gozaimasu. Probably gonna drop that U as well. No thanks. The clerk bowed again. Arigatou gozaimasu. No, it sounds put on. No thanks. The clerk bowed again. Arigatou gozaimasu. Rick ducked his head. Arigato. He staggered to the elevator and managed to wedge himself into the space with his luggage. It wasn't the smallest elevator he'd been in, but it was close. Fortunately, nobody else tried to join him. Unfortunately, the space reeked of cigarette smoke, and he hoped whatever guest enjoyed that habit was checking out soon. He made it to the room and was pleasantly surprised that while small and space-efficient, it wasn't cramped. There was a small open closet to one side and the bathroom door to the other. The bed took up most of the room, but he could walk comfortably around it. A small desk was attached to the wall by the window. In all, it had everything he expected out of a hotel, with none of the massive wastes of space most American rooms had used. Wall by the window. Attached to the wall by the window. Oh. Still missed it. Attached to the wall by the window. In all, it had everything he expected out of a hotel, with none of the massive wastes of space of most American rooms had used. He stashed his luggage and finished his laptop out to drop it on the desk, then went to check out the bathroom. There were no major surprises, but its raised floor felt a little weird. The tub was shorter than he was used to, and the toilet had a control panel which he was not even going to try and make sense of that night. But in all, it had pretty much what he expected to find. He stripped down and brushed himself out, taking comfort in the familiar ritual and smoothing out the travel-matted fur. When he fell into bed, his paws dangled off the edge of the bed. It feels like that's a duplicate. Crimson, since you're here, what do you think? When he fell into the bed, his paws dangled off the edge. Cut that. Oh yeah, there's a delay, isn't there? Oh gosh, if you're even... Your document, is that... Were you replying to me, or... Concur. Okay, good. The edge of the... When he fell in... travel-matted fur. When he fell into the bed, his paws dangled off the edge. At 6'2", he'd gotten used to being a little too tall, but this bed was clearly shorter than the ones he was used to. After some fussing around, he managed to find a way to sleep crossways and get all of himself on the mattress and let travel fatigue put him into an early, heavy sleep. Rick found himself awake at 5 o'clock. He felt like he could have slept for another day, but he counted it a small favor that he didn't feel entirely terrible and was waking up in the morning. Breakfast was a challenge. You would document in the same way that you hand off an aircraft with your aircraft. Yes, okay, understood. No, I appreciate that, but the text is the author. So unless it's to my eyes a very clear little flub or oversight, I will never presume to alter the author's text. Down that path, madness lies. Breakfast was a challenge. Breakfast was a challenge. First, he forgot his breakfast ticket until he stepped out of the elevator. Then, once he had his ticket, he didn't know what exactly to do with it. Fortunately, the vixen taking tickets spoke enough English to help him through the process. From there, he was on his own again, but hotel breakfast bars didn't seem to vary too wildly the world over. There was food in one area, trays and dishes in another, and coffee and tea stationed in a third. The food was one part familiar and one part different. There was rice to go with sausages and thin scrambled eggs, and while the combination was new to him, he found it both palatable and filling. Coffee was more difficult. None of the options were labelled in Romanji, much less English. He settled for pressing one of the buttons. Scrambled eggs is one of those things that's the same but different. I noticed in Sweden when I visited there, their scrambled eggs are like wet. It's very peculiar. It's not just soft eggs, but they're kind of sopping wet. I guess they add milk, cream, water. I don't know. Not to my taste. As far as I'm concerned, scrambled eggs should be scrambled in the pan. Knob of butter, unwhisked eggs, and you whisk them in the pan gently, because then you get that nice plethora of textures. English. Anji, much less English. He settled for pressing one of the buttons. The machine whirred and growled and eventually filled his cup with coffee. Cream and sugar were nearby, and while not labelled, he managed. As friendly as the hotel was, very little in the restaurant area was labelled in a language he could read. Rick muddled through breakfast as best he could. Coffee steadied his nerves, and the food settled like a growing emptiness. Nope. Breath there. Language he could read. Rick muddled through breakfast as best he could. Coffee steadied his nerves, and the food settled the growing emptiness in his stomach. He found himself glad for the solid food. It was a small spot of comfort amid a growing tension. Finished with his meal, he became aware of the rest of the diners, who clustered in distinct groups. One sounded like they might be German or Scandinavian, another might have been Chinese, and many groups seemed to be Japanese. No one near him seemed to be listening to a news report in French. Nobody in the dining area was speaking English, and the din of unfamiliar languages left Rick pinning his ears back. Rick got himself another coffee to help with the jet lag, and flicked at his phone, killing time and using the hotel's wireless to check email for the 5th time. His calendar suggested the meeting that morning was at 10 was still on. Email for the 5th time. His calendar suggested the meeting that morning... Nope. For the 5th time. His calendar suggested the meeting that morning at 10 was still on. Email said he'd be meeting his father's executive assistant. Wow. Calm down, Kaki. You're going too fast. At 10 was still on. No, there's a breath there. I've got to take it earlier. Email for the 5th time. His calendar suggested the meeting that morning at 10 was still on. Email said he'd be meeting his father's executive assistant, whom he'd met only briefly. Fiona O'Clair was a vixen with the sort of muted Irish accent that he found incredibly charming, and paired well with her intense personality. His father had spoken highly of her since she'd been hired several years prior. He couldn't sit still any longer, so he got up and handed his tray to the vixen who'd taken his ticket with a small bow and an arigato. A little politeness was the least he could do. Rick stopped in at his room to freshen up and grab his briefcase. He was going to be hellaciously early, but he couldn't bear to sit in the hotel any longer. A short walk and several wrong turns later, Rick found himself at the train station. The hotel was not a reasonable walking distance to the client's office, so he had to contend with the morning crowd on the subway. That sounded ridiculous. I thought that sentence was going to go, the hotel was not a reasonable walking distance to the train station, which would have been like an ironic commentary on an overly optimistic, if not outright lying, self-description by the hotel. But that's not where the story went, so we do this again. Found himself at the train station. The hotel was not a reasonable walking distance to the client's office, so he had to contend with the morning crowd on the subway. He already had his fare card, but he still had to consult a saved email and the subway maps for several minutes before he approached the gate he was reasonably sure led to the line he needed. Locals made it seem easy, putting their phones or their cards against the reader and walking confidently through the gates. Rick approached it with some trepidation, but the display went green and the gate swung aside, so he hurried through lest any more people cut around him to the other gates. No one said anything, but it was clear that he was moving entirely too slowly. Once through, he followed one set of stairs down, forgetting to walk on the left, not the right, but managing to correct his mistake after inconveniencing no fewer than 12 people. Unfortunately, closer inspection of the trains on that platform revealed that he had chosen poorly, and he had to make his way back up the stairs against the flow of traffic. At least he'd been on the correct side. Soon enough, he stood on a platform that seemed to lead in the right direction. Overhead signs largely displayed lead in the right direction. Overhead signs largely displayed a frustrating mix of kanji and hiragana. Actually, I need a little water. I'm gonna lube my instrument up real quick. Only fools rushing, but I can't help falling in love with you. Got romance on the brain today, seems like. Like the river flows, largely displayed a surely to the sea, darling, so it goes. Sometimes direction. Some things are meant to be. Okay. Lead in the right direction. Overhead signs largely displayed a frustrating mix of kanji and hiragana. Still wrong. Lead in the right direction. Overhead signs largely displayed a frustrating mix of kanji and hiragana, but they also rotated through romanji, and by the time a train arrived, he was fairly sure it was the right one. Rick was not prepared for what a Tokyo rush hour was like. The train was already crowded when it arrived, and he shuffled on with the other passengers when the doors opened. He had not realized he was only in the middle of the queue until he found himself getting shuffled farther and farther from the door as more people piled in. Men, women, and school kids of all ages seemed to pour endlessly through the doors, and the press of bodies grew claustrophobic. He knew he stood out, a tall grey wolf, head and shoulders above the rest of the crowd and taking up too much space no matter how much he tried. It was a silver lining that the crush of bodies meant he didn't stagger much when the train started moving. Even in the press of other passengers, Rick wanted some solid support. He reached for a handle hanging from overhead and clocked another passenger in the temple. He'd been told there was an apology for more serious infractions, but he racked his brain for a moment and nothing came out, so he settled for blurting. Now, where was my breath? Serious infractions, but he racked his brain for a moment and nothing came out, so he settled for a... Don't zoom in too much. For a moment, and nothing came out, So he settled for blurting "sumimasen" and ducking his head in as much of a bow as he could manage without hitting someone else. The next stop wasn't much better. People poured in and out of the train, though mostly in. One business cat squeezed in just as the doors were closing, and the entire crowd somehow managed to sneak a space for him, though it left him pressed against the doors. Rick wondered if they'd open again. He was glad he was not near the door, given how riders had to leave and jump back on to accommodate people getting off. It was a marvel nobody got left behind. The train was a cacophony of scents. The sheer density of people on the train overwhelmed any attempt at air handling, and it thoroughly exceeded any of Rick's prior experiences. He'd been on American and even European subways that, while crowded, didn't have so many people or so many smells with them. Adding to the mix was that so many of them were unfamiliar. Different chemicals in riders' soaps, different foods in their diets. Even the cleaning chemicals were different. Much was familiar, but nothing smelled quite right. It was entirely too much. So he focused on just those scents closest to him, until the rest faded into a sort of background noise. It was still a lot, but it was manageable. The train was surprisingly quiet. A few riders had conversations, in Japanese of course, but they kept to low volumes and the vast majority seemed focused on their books or their phones. Rick thought about reaching for his phone, but it was tucked in a pocket, and he wasn't sure he'd get it out without dropping it or elbowing someone in the face, or both. Instead, he stared at the ceiling, with its unfamiliar and largely illegible ads, and their advertising focus that was for a culture he was clearly not a part of. A weathered, familiar American actor was selling canned coffee, and Rick resolved to try it just for the experience. He was pretty sure he'd seen the brand on a vending machine at some point since he'd arrived. And it might be appropriate if the celebrity were Sean Connery, but this is an American actor. He was... I'm gonna say I'm really enjoying this. It is like a good old-fashioned travelogue, just the experiences that he's having. I'm really enjoying it. I'm reminded of, oh God, I wonder if I'm dating myself here. There was a blog many, many years ago called Gaijin Smash. And I think it was by, an American, an African-American fella who was in Japan as an English teacher for primary school children. And it was sort of, it was documenting his experience as much like Rick Stoller here, a big hunkin', gaijin, in a culture where personal space has different dimensions. So he described, okay, so that was the cool thing. Everything that he experienced, he described in terms of a superpower. So at one point, like a woman on the subway fainted, and he had a little emergency medical training, so he knew basic first aid and that she needed some space around her, but obviously it was very crowded, and he tried to ask people to take a step back, and even in Japanese, they didn't really pay a lot of attention to him, still crowding around, and he decided that she still needed more space, so he stood up big and tall and puffed out his chest and used his Gaijin Smash superpower, because when a Gaijin stands up, suddenly everybody takes a little step back, unsure what's about to happen. Oh, and I saw a terrible video once. It was one of those prank things. A friendly American gentleman went to a Japanese park, and there was a light rain, and he'd walk up to a couple of people under their umbrella, all smiles, and go, "Hi, can I just borrow," and sort of reach for their umbrella until they gave it to him, and then take it from them, and then "Thank you," and then just walk off with it, leaving them baffled. And we have no protocol for this. What are we supposed to do? Did we get robbed? Like, none of it makes sense. Poor people. Okay, where was the experience? The experience. Yeah, just for the experience. He was pretty sure he'd seen the brand on a vending machine at some point since he'd arrived. Eventually, the name of the station he needed popped up on the sign over the doors. He shuffled towards them, mumbling "sumimasen" as though it were a talisman of safe passage. I want a North Carolina accent on "sumimasen." There we go. That's what I want. He'd arrived. Eventually, the name of the station he needed popped up on the sign over the doors. He shuffled towards them, mumbling Sumimasen as though it were a talisman of safe passage. For the most part, it seemed to work, and by the time the train arrived at his stop, he was expelled with the rest of the riders getting off there and swept up with the flow of people. He managed to break away, tucking himself against the sign, and took the chance to get his bearings, finally decided that the stairs in front of him would probably lead to his destination. That's so terrible. Well, no, I think Rick Stoller has probably read the books, but he hasn't gone on YouTube to check it out. I never, ever. Okay, I won't say it that much. I do not like when people are mocked for trying to speak another language that they don't master. Everybody, when it comes from a place of trying or doing your best, it's different when you kind of decline or refuse. But do you think it's bad? I'm kind of charmed by Rick Stoller. Am I saying his name right? Let me check real quick. Yeah, Rick Stoller. Well, by his North Carolinian attempts. Sumimasen. Oh, you meant the umbrella thief. Oh, yes. That was funny, but also terrible. Probably lead to his destination. Okay, back to it. Probably lead to his destination. Lead to his destination. Luck was with him, and he emerged at the top of the stairs into the station proper. He took full advantage of his height to scan the signs hanging from the ceiling, and managed to break from the traffic flow to go out through the right set of gates. He was grateful he'd spent so much time memorizing the transit direction. This far into the city, there didn't seem to be a lot of spaces to stand and look at a map. Out on the streets, it was crowded, but less overwhelming. The open air of the city added its own scent of fresh smells, but the crowds had a little more room to spread out, and Rick felt less compressed as he set out toward the client's office. Sumimasen. Yeah. Well, what else can we have? Oh, Go Man Nasai. Many Go Mans. Well, he probably also, when he has a dessert, he orders a tiramisu toward the client's office. The Ikeda Heavy Industries office was a very convenient block from the station. Just gonna check the pronunciation real quick because it should be like so, if I'm not mistaken. Where do we have it? Ikeda Sota. Ikeda Sota. Ikeda. Which one is it? The Ikeda Heavy Industries office was a very convenient block from the station. I think it should be a flat I. Hirohito. The client's office. Ichi. Client's office. The Ikeda Heavy Industries office was a very convenient block from the station. The Martin at the reception desk was rather perturbed he was so early, but the conference room was ready and empty, so she let him wait there. Being in a quiet, empty space that was larger than he needed for himself was a pleasant change from the rest of the morning. He'd been reviewing his presentation, more out of a need to do something than a need to prepare further, when someone walked in. That someone, in this case, was his father's executive assistant. "Rick, you're early." She took a seat next to him and put her briefcase on the chair. "Miss O'Clair? Better an hour early than a minute late. Dad was always fond of that one." He shrugged. "Besides, I didn't know how long it would take, and I didn't really have anything else to do." "Fiona, please." She set a laptop of her own on the table, followed by a pen and a leather-bound notebook. "I suppose sleeping in wasn't an option." "No, we can do better." A leather-bound notebook. "I suppose sleeping in wasn't an option." He shook his head. "God, no. I was up at 5. Every syllable or syllable-like sound. Okay, so it's more like, I guess, French? I mean, French still has language or sentence melodies, but It doesn't have syllabic emphasis. God, no. I was up at 5. No, I was up at 5. She contemplated that for a moment, then shrugged. That's really quite a reasonable time. Up just before the sun, plenty of time for a morning run, breakfast, and getting here. You could do worse. Rick snorted. I was in no shape to run, and I didn't pack anything for it. Hell, I barely managed to accomplish breakfast. Present ticket, eat food, too complicated for you? She shook her head. I told your father this was too much too soon. He couldn't tell if the disappointed look she gave him as she sat down was serious or not. He let it go unanswered for a minute, but uncertainty won out. Couldn't tell if the disappointed look he let it go on. I think I was speaking away from the microphone there. It was too much too soon. He couldn't tell if the disappointed look... Did I start prematurely? No, okay. And now I've skipped through the document. Well now. There we are. This was too much too soon. He couldn't tell if the disappointed look she gave him as she sat down was serious or not. He let it go unanswered for a minute, but uncertainty won out. Great vote of confidence there. She jabbed him in the arm with the tip of a claw and gave him a grin instead. It's a joke. You must have left your sense of humour at customs. He rolled his eyes. Oh, don't remind me. Customs, exchange, train card. We're at customs. He rolled his eyes. Oh, don't remind me. Customs, exchange, train card. So much to do all at once. I'm lucky I made it to the hotel. You know, you could have just used your phone. I hear it has these navigation functions. Yeah, and no data plan. She cocked her head at him. Really? She opened her laptop and tapped away at it furiously for a few moments. Rick was impressed at just how quickly she found exactly what she was looking for. We ordered it. Did you try to activate it? No. Nobody told me. Isn't it hideously expensive? Fiona shrugged and waggled her paws in a vague gesture. It's that or you get a phone for every region you visit, and that's more trouble than it's worth. It's an approved expense. She fixed him with a sharp look. You do know how to turn it on, right? He pulled his phone out and poked at it. I haven't tried. I just turned off cell services before I left the US. She sighed and grabbed the phone. Fine, I'll do it. More furious tapping and swiping for a minute. Then she thrust it back at him. Here, don't watch too many cat videos. We didn't get you the unlimited plan. Still, it should get you through translating maps. Rick eyed her for a moment, then poked at the mail icon. New mail appeared. Looks good. Indeed. Her ears perked up and she sat up straight, then looked over his shoulder at the door. Okay, silence it and put it away. Client's here, and stand up. Nope. More authority. Less dismissal. Her ears perked up. Indeed. That's too cheeky. A little bit more sultry there. Looks good. Indeed. Her ears perked up and she sat up straight, then looked over his shoulder at the door. Okay, silence it and put it away. Client's here. Oh, and stand up. She followed her own advice and gave her jacket a tug, not that it needed straightening. Rick scrambled to his feet and stuffed his phone in his pocket. The time for worrying passed as the door opened and the receptionist from earlier stepped through, followed by their client. He matched the photo and overview his father had given him on the man perfectly. Followed by their client. He matched the photo and overview his father had given him on the man perfectly. Ikeda Sota was a 50-something silver-furred fox who carried himself with reserve, as though he disapproved of everything around him. Perhaps he simply expected to be disappointed. Perhaps he already had been. Rick was distracted from this line of thought when the other person they were waiting for followed Sota through the door. Aba Ren also matched the bio Rick had been given. In his case, this meant he was a tanuki, of somewhat stockier build than his boss and a little shorter. He moved with less poise and had an uncomfortable energy that set him apart from his boss far more than his appearance did. Mr. Ikeda was the VP of Information Technology for Ikeda Heavy Industries, the The CEO was his cousin. Mr. Abba was to be the project manager. Abba? How long am I saying that vowel? He moved with Les Tanuki, of somewhat stockier. Where was it? Ren also matched. Abba Ren also matched. Abba. Abba Ren also matched. Abba Ren. Yeah, okay, so it's got to be about the same. Mr. Abba was. CEO was his cousin. Mr. Abba was to be the. Pardon me. Sorry. Dab. Abba. Take a chance on me. No, that's terrible. Thank you for joining me on this recording, by the way. CEO was his cousin. Mr. Abba was to be the project manager for integrating the network management software Rick was selling. IHI wasn't the same sort of giant as Fuji or Samsung. Yeah, I was just wondering whether I should try to pronounce Fuji as Fuji, but no, it's an international brand. As Fuji or Samsung. But they maintained more than enough production locations throughout Japan to make for an interesting network that consumed entirely too many man-hours keeping it running smoothly. Rick's product would help IHI reduce the man-hours and get more out of them. He hoped the network would run smoothly. They stood on the other side of the table and appeared to consider him quietly. Mr. Ikeda, thank you for having us. Rick fished a couple of folders out of his briefcase and slid them across the table. He pointed at one, then the other. That is an annotated copy of the presentation if you'd like to follow along. It contains more details about the software that I'll be referencing as we go. Fiona helpfully cut the lights, and Rick started. So, from what I understand, Ikeda Heavy Industries wants to increase awareness of their network topology without relying on static documentation, which, of course, is out of date the moment it's printed. Stoller Solutions has developed a dynamic network documentation and management suite built around a simple guiding principle. The network is the documentation. That should fade out more. Built around a simple guiding principle. Around a simple guiding principle. The network is the documentation. So that could have gone better. Rick stabbed at the bowl of rice and fish and something else that sat in front of him. Fiona had ordered and told him it was a sticky bowl. It looked and smelled strange, and his stomach was giving him fits after the meeting, so he wasn't feeling the hunger he might have. Fiona shrugged and tucked into her bowl with an enthusiasm Rick couldn't understand. It went well enough. What makes you think that? They were nearly silent the whole time, and the old man... Mr. Ikeda, please. Fiona gave him a look that said this was not up for debate. Whatever the org chart said, he knew better than to argue with her. Okay, Mr. Ikeda looked like he'd smelled something foul through the whole presentation. He took a bite of his food. It was indeed quite sticky, and also quite tasty. His stomach seemed to decide that this was acceptable, and the tension retreated to make room for hunger. Fiona grinned at him. That's why I told you to mix it up. Most Americans wouldn't eat natto with their first lunch, but there you go. She leveled her spoon at him. And that brings me back to my point. You're doing better than you think. No. And that brings me back to my point. You're doing better than you think. Hey? He cocked his head at her. Surely not. Hadn't she just said as much? Hadn't he just said as much? Surely not. Hadn't he just said as much? She shook her head. So Mr. Ikeda looked like that because he always looked like that. It's just something about him. Every photo I've ever seen, he looks disappointed. That has nothing to do with whether or not he wants our services. She shrugged and flicked her ears, although it probably doesn't help that we're a Western company. Rick turned his head to the other side. What now? Does he have a thing against Westerners? Fiona laughed. Nice. Yes, a lot of older folks here, especially from more well-to-do families, have leftover prejudices, especially against Westerners. She grinned. I'm sure you've met a few She grinned. I'm sure you've met folks back in the US who are the same way. Rick waved his spoon in a waffling sort of admission. He'd seen something similar in a few associates he'd had over the years. They'd never seemed like bad people, but they probably weren't angels either. Sure, I guess. Uh-huh. So imagine that the Japanese people too, and they have similar... So imagine that the Japanese people too, and they have similar issues. Uh-huh. Sure, I guess. Uh-huh. So imagine that the Japanese are people too. That's what I'm missing. Sure, I guess. Uh-huh. So imagine that the Japanese are people too, and they have similar issues floating around in their culture. It's how life goes. Plus, frankly, she waved a paw, war, internment camps, nuclear bombs, occupation. There are a few bumpy parts in our history. You did learn about that, right? Rick flicked his ears. Yeah, I guess so. Good. Fiona shrugged again, then paused her lesson to attack her food with the same almost terrifying intensity she did everything else. Same almost terrifying. Oh. Good. Fiona shrugged again, then paused her lesson to attack her food with the same almost terrifying intensity she did everything else. So that's Mr. Ikeda. Oh, don't worry about it. He's talking to us and that's good enough. We sell a great piece of software and you're going to make sure it works for him. Rick groaned. Yeah, sure. She snorted. Such confidence. Look, you want to score some points with him, right? He nodded. Naturally. Fine. Try changing a couple of things. Show them you're trying to respect their culture. And if I make a mistake... She laughed again. Oh, you'll make mistakes. But so what? You're a gaijin. You can't possibly get it completely right. But that you are trying, sincerely trying, that'll get you a long way, and it should prevent the most egregious mistakes. Rick shoveled another spoonful of sticky bowl into his muzzle and eyed the vixen curiously. Did I make any today? She raised an eyebrow. I think you know the answer to... Did I make any today? She raised an eyebrow. I think you know the answer to that. Mr. Ikeda's reaction wasn't just resting grumpy face. I think you know the answer to that. Mr. Ikeda's reaction wasn't just grump face. Resting grump face. Kaki, read the sentence. Come on. Think you know the answer to that. Mr. Ikeda's reaction wasn't just resting grump face. He stared at his bowl. Oh. Yes. Well, I guess we didn't give you a culture briefing before this, did we? He shook his head. No, you pretty much hired me out of my job in RTP and sent me here. She tapped a claw on the table. Did we? I mean, yeah, we probably should have... sent movers for your stuff. Got anything embarrassing out? We could have you moved before you get home. Fiona grinned at him. No. She's joshing with him. She tapped a claw. RTP and send me here. Renting grumpface. RTP and send me here. She tapped a claw on the table. Did we? I mean, yeah, we should probably send movers for your stuff. Got anything embarrassing out? We could have you moved before you get home. Fiona grinned at him. I'm kidding. But you're right, this was pretty time sensitive, so we didn't really give you time to brief. At least you know the software we're selling. Mostly because Dad loved to talk about it any time we got together. She shrugged. The advantage of hiring family. Besides, you had a career before you brought you into the fold. Rick grumbled and avoided answering by digging into the remains of his bowl. Like I said, you have some street cred. She shrugged again. Back on topic. Yes, you made mistakes. Step 1, don't point with one finger. Sure, you'll see locals do it here, but it's more polite to use your whole paw, like this. She gestured at his bowl with all 4 fingers together and her thumb held close to the side of her palm. Just as precise, but doesn't run afoul of the finger thing. What's that about? He pointed back at her with a similarly open paw, just to try it out. She grinned, much better. And I have no idea. It's what I was told. I guess it's less demeaning or something like that. In any case, give it a shot. You probably won't notice a difference in their reactions, but it's polite. Rick nodded. Okay, anything else I screwed up? Next time you give the client a packet, try not to just toss it on the table. That kind of works in the US, but even then it's pretty casual. Hand it over with 2 paws, give a little bow, acknowledge the transfer. He nodded. Fair enough. They'd both finished by then. Fiona pushed back a little from the table and waved at a server. Sumimasen. The weasel woman came over immediately. Hai? Cheku onegaishimasu. The server gave a little bow, said, Hi, okay, and disappeared. Fiona turned her attention back to Rick. So also, if you want your check, that's how it goes. Don't sit around waiting for them to notice you. Rick nodded and reached for his wallet. She shook her head and held out a paw. No, I'll handle it. This one's on the company anyway. As are the rest of your meals if you don't go crazy. She paused and glanced at the clock on her phone. I have some work to do, but you should go see a museum or something. Tokyo National Museum is gorgeous and only a couple thousand yen. Go, learn a little about the culture, maybe buy a book. Rick chuckled. Yes, ma'am. I guess this'll be my cultural briefing. She wagged a finger at him. Don't ever call me ma'am again if you want to live. But yes, think of it that way. Now, go do some learning and try not to screw up tomorrow. Hi, okay. Fiona ladded. Good nod. Almost made it to the end. Hi, okay. No, he's got to be more. Try not to screw up tomorrow. Hi, okay. Fiona nodded. Good lad. Onegaishimasu. Okay, did I say it? So how far back do we go? Then glanced at the clock on her phone. I have some work to do, but you should go see a museum or something. Turned her attention back to Rick. So also, if you want your... The server gave a little bow, said, Hi. Weasel woman came over immediately. Hi? Cheku onegaishimasu. Hi? Cheku onegaishimasu. That's even worse. Cheku onegaishimasu. Onegaishimasu. Hi? Cheku onegaishimasu. It is fun trying to speak Japanese with an Irish accent. These are some fun challenges you gave me, Crimson. What cool writing. I swear I absolutely love it. Good lad. Morning found Rick in better spirits. 6 o'clock was real progress on waking up at a reasonable time, since he'd always been a 7 o'clock sort of wolf. The bed was no longer wholly unfamiliar, and he'd managed to find a more comfortable sleeping position. The bathroom was just a little easier to use. Practice, even a day's worth. Comfortable sleeping position. The bathroom was just a little easier to use. Practice, even a day's worth, went a long way. He remembered his breakfast ticket, and breakfast itself was even more exciting, as they traded out the familiar sausages for some kind of grilled fish. Emboldened, he piled rice in a bowl and topped it with the fish and the slightly runny eggs. He was sure it wasn't terribly traditional, but it was a lot different from what he was used to, and that was a start. Plus, it smelled good, and reminded him of the previous day's lunch. Even coffee was more familiar, and in the spirit of adventure, he pressed the other button on the machine. He couldn't tell the difference in the result, but it was coffee, and that was good enough. And that was good enough. The subway station hadn't moved, so he found it readily enough, and the interior was a little more familiar and a little less stressful. The ride to the Ikeda office was still cramped, but he didn't hit anyone, and he managed to more or less move with the crowd as he was expelled onto the platform at his stop. Perhaps he could learn after all. He nodded to the Martin behind the reception desk as he entered Ikeda's lobby. Ohio. Yes, that's exactly how he would say it. Ohio. 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 She raised an eyebrow at him, but offered a slight smile as she stood and led him to the conference room. This way, Mr. Stoller. Miss O'Clair is already waiting for you. Rick nodded. Arigato. She gave a short bow and left him with Fiona. You beat me here this time. You beat me here this time. And left him with Fiona. You beat me here this time, he remarked. The vixen grinned. You were making me look bad. Besides, you're later than yesterday. He shrugged and pulled out his laptop and presentation from his bag. I'm starting to get a feel for the commute. Commute? No. Like the Statel? What's it? Like the state? Oh, yes. Ohio, yeah. He shrugged and... You're later than yesterday. He shrugged and pulled out his laptop and presentation from his bag. I'm starting to get a feel for the commute. She nodded. Good to hear it. Ready to sell it today? Rick paused his preparations and looked at her, cocking his head in thought. You know, I think I am. At least I'll give it my best and we'll see how it goes. Fiona patted his shoulder. That's all any of us can do. Now let's get set up. We have a lot of work ahead of us. This was Tokyo Tension by Crimson Ruari, read for you by Kaki, your faithful fireside companion. For more stories, you can find us wherever you get your podcasts or on the web at thevoice.dog. Thank you for listening to The Voice of Dog. That was a lovely story. I really enjoyed it. Got the fish out of water. And I'm going to just fix up the ending here. Now let's get set up. We have a lot of work ahead of us. This was Tokyo Tension by Crimson Ruari. Let the music start just a little earlier. Oh, I'm glad you like it. Yeah, this was a really fun story to read. It reminded me, I mean, just for the fact that that's an American in Japan trying to make his way there, of the best Fast and the Furious film, Fast and the Furious Tokyo Drift, which I think it was the third one or whatever, and you had the kid in who was in an early Sam Raimi series called American Gothic, and he was he was an American high school student sent off to Japan and kind of making it on his own, and then there's cars and races and a girl involved, obviously, because it is that kind of movie. But I really enjoyed the fish out of water aspect. That's something I find charming and relatable, and I like that here too. I like that about Rick Stoller. That he's well-meaning, and it wasn't like a huge comedy of manners. These were entirely plausible and relatable mistakes, incompatibilities, anxieties that we experience when we go somewhere new, and also like he learned very quickly. I mean, if you're attentive and you want to do better, it really doesn't take that long to learn. How to use the 3 seashells, I guess. Oh, the Fast and Furious films are hard to stream. Well, okay. I guess there's some kind of conspiracy against speed. Or maybe maybe that's the warp speed effect. Alright. This is exporting. That's going to take a wee while. I think I'm going to sign off for the evening and get a little cup of tea and an early night. So thank you for joining me. Thank you for listening to the Voice of Dog. Crimson, you did a great job. So I'm going to schedule this episode probably somewhere next week. I'm starting to build up a bit more of a buffer. It might actually be the week after, because I've got one part story that's by a new author. That one's scheduled for next week, and I might do a 2-part story, so then it'll be a week after that. I always like to prioritize authors that haven't submitted before. All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed looking in the kitchen, or however it's described, and